In the pouring rain of a New York morning, a millionaire businesswoman drives past her own mansion and sees something that stops her heart. Her loyal maid, her silent, invisible helper, sitting alone under an old oak tree, eating a soaked lunch with tears mixing into the downpour. She has everything money can buy, except the courage to truly see.
You're such a good boy.
But one faithful German Shepherd is about to change that forever. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more. The rain came down in steady sheets that morning, gray and unrelenting, turning the world outside the tall iron gates into a soft, blurred watercolor. The big house stood silent behind its trimmed hedges, windows dark except for one faint light in the upper hall. Sophia Hayes was 35, a woman who had built a life of sharp edges and quiet victories. She drove the black SUV slowly up the long drive, hands steady on the wheel, eyes fixed ahead. Her hair, long and brown, was pulled into a low knot at the nape of her neck. Strands had escaped and clung damply to her temples. She wore the same tailored black blazer and white shirt she had worn to the board meeting the night before, the crisp fabric now carrying the faint scent of coffee and city air. Beneath the surface of her calm movements lay a familiar ache, the kind that had settled in years ago and refused to leave. Divorce papers signed in a lawyer's office with too much glass and not enough warmth. Parents gone too soon, buried under the weight of their own ambitions. She had learned early that success could fill rooms, but not the quiet spaces inside a person. Bruno sat beside her in the passenger seat, a 5-year-old German Shepherd, black and tan coat still glossy despite the years, ears pricked forward, eyes alert. He was the only living thing she allowed close enough to hear her breathe at night. His presence was steady, wordless, a large, warm weight against the loneliness she carried like an old coat. The wipers swept back and forth in slow rhythm. Rain tapped the roof like fingers drumming on a table, patient, waiting. Sophia felt the old memory rise unbidden. A child standing in the doorway of an empty house, listening to the same rain, waiting for footsteps that never came soon enough. Back then, there had been another dog, smaller, golden, who would press against her leg until the shivering stopped. Now Bruno filled that same space, his breathing calm and even, a quiet anchor. She reached over without looking and rested her palm on the thick fur behind his ears. He leaned into the touch, eyes half closed, content in the small circle of her hand. Then Bruno lifted his head. A low sound rose in his throat, not a bark yet, more a question, his gaze fixed on the garden beyond the driveway. Sophia slowed the car. Through the streaked windshield, she saw him. Michael Rivera, the man who kept the house running. 43 years old, broad-shouldered but lean from years of lifting and scrubbing, dark hair cropped short, light stubble shadowing his jaw. His skin carried the warm tone of his heritage, weathered now by sun and time. He wore the usual dark gray polo and khaki work pants, sleeves rolled to the elbows, the fabric darkened and clinging from the downpour. He sat beneath the old oak at the edge of the lawn, back against the trunk, knees drawn up, a cheap plastic lunchbox open on his lap. Rice and beans, simple, soaked through. Rain ran in rivulets down his face. His shoulders rose and fell in small, controlled breaths. Sophia could not hear him cry, but she saw it, the way the water mixed with something saltier, the way his hand paused halfway to his mouth, trembling just enough to notice. She stared. The sight lodged somewhere deep, a small stone dropped into still water. Michael had worked for her 3 years. Quiet, reliable, always early, always gone before she noticed. She had never asked his name until the first payroll check. Even then it was only a line on paper. Now he sat there like a man who had forgotten what shelter felt like. The rain kept falling. Bruno whined softly, nose pressed to the glass. Sophia felt her throat tighten. Not pity, not yet. Something quieter. Recognition, perhaps. 2 people alone in the same storm, one inside steel and glass, one under a tree, both carrying weights no one else could see. Bruno turned to her then, large head nudging her forearm, warm breath against her sleeve. His eyes held hers a moment, steady, knowing, without demand. Sophia exhaled slowly. The ache in her chest shifted, not gone, but no longer quite so private. She did not get out of the car. Not yet. But something inside her, small and long asleep, stirred. A faint promise, hardly a whisper. Maybe tomorrow she would ask his name again. Maybe tomorrow she would listen. The house settled into its usual hush after the rain stopped, but the air still held a damp chill that lingered in the corners. Afternoon light slanted through the tall windows, pale and thin, touching the polished wood floors like a memory that had lost its warmth. Sophia moved through the day like a woman carrying an extra weight she could not name. Meetings blurred into one another. Voices on the speakerphone, numbers on screens, hands shaking across conference tables. She answered questions, signed papers, nodded at the right moments. Yet her mind kept returning to the oak tree, to the man sitting beneath it, with rain running down his face. The image had rooted itself somewhere deep, refusing to fade. She caught herself staring at the garden from her office window more than once, the glass cool against her fingertips. Bruno had stayed home that day, pacing the hallway outside her study door. Every so often she heard him, a low, insistent whine directed toward the back lawn, as though he too remembered. She tried to push the feeling aside. Work had always been her shield, but the shield felt thinner now, frayed at the edges by something she had not invited. That evening, after the last call ended and the house grew quiet again, Sophia found herself in the kitchen. The senior housekeeper, Mrs. Ellis, a sturdy woman in her late 50s, with gray-streaked hair pinned neatly and a voice soft from years of careful listening, came in to clear the counters. Sophia poured coffee she did not drink, then asked the question that had been waiting all day. "Michael," she said, "the man who tends the grounds and the house, does he always eat outside?" Mrs. Ellis paused, cloth in hand, eyes thoughtful. She spoke quietly. "He preferred it," she said. "Said he didn't want to disturb anyone." The staff room was warm, the table big enough, but Michael carried his lunchbox to the garden every break, rain or shine. Sophia listened. The words landed gently, like sinews settling into a pond. She thanked Mrs. Ellis and walked away, cup still untouched. In the silence of the hallway, the ache in her chest shifted again, smaller but sharper. The next noon, the sky had cleared to a pale blue, the kind that makes shadows long and forgiving. Sophia clipped Bruno's leash and stepped out the back door. The grass was still damp underfoot. She wore flat shoes today, the black blazer traded for a simple gray sweater that felt softer against her skin. Bruno trotted ahead, tail high, ears forward. He knew the path. When they reached the edge of the lawn, he broke into a joyful run, straight toward the oak. Michael was there again, seated on the low stone wall this time, lunchbox open beside him. He looked up as Bruno reached him, large head nudging his knee, tail sweeping the ground in wide arcs. Michael's hand hesitated, then rested on the thick fur, fingers working slowly behind the ears. A small smile touched his mouth, the first Sophia had ever seen from him. She approached more slowly, steps measured. When she was close enough, she spoke his name, Michael. He stood quickly, brushing crumbs from his pants, eyes dropping to the ground. "Ma'am," he said, voice low and rough around the edges, the accent of someone who had grown up speaking 2 languages and chose his words with care. She asked why he ate outside when the house had space. He apologized, soft, automatic, the way a man apologizes for existing in the wrong place. No real answer came, just the bowed head, the hands clasped in front. Sophia felt the old impulse to turn away, to let silence close the gap again. But Bruno stayed. He circled Michael once, then sat at his feet, leaning against the man's leg as though it were the most natural spot in the world. Michael's hand returned to the dog's head, scratching gently. And then, almost without realizing, he began to speak. To Bruno, not to her. Quiet words, half whispers. About a wife who worked double shifts until the day the accident took her. About nights alone with a boy who asked why Mommy didn't come home. about the weight of keeping promises when the world had already broken most of them. Sophia stood a few paces back, hidden partly by the shadow of the tree. She heard every word. The story entered her like cool water into dry earth. She thought of her own empty rooms, the photographs she no longer looked at, the way she had learned to live without asking for anything from anyone. Bruno looked up at Michael with those steady eyes, then turned his head toward her. A brief glance, calm and sure. She did not speak. Not then. But as she walked back to the house with Bruno at her side, the leash loose between them, she felt the first real crack in the wall she had built so carefully. Not a collapse, just a breath of air through stone. Enough to remind her that listening, truly listening, might be the smallest, bravest thing a person could do. The days began to carry a different weight, quieter now, as though the house itself were listening. Late afternoons brought long shadows across the lawn, the kind that stretch and soften everything they touch, turning ordinary grass into something almost golden. Sophia found herself watching more than working. From the study window, she saw Michael move through the garden, raking leaves, trimming hedges, wiping down the stone benches with slow, deliberate strokes. Bruno followed him most days, a large shadow at the man's heels. The dog would trot alongside, pausing when Michael knelt to pull a weed, then nudge his arm with a gentle insistence until a hand came down to scratch behind the ears. Sophia noticed how Michael's shoulders eased in those moments, the tension in his jaw loosening just a fraction. She began to leave the back door ajar so Bruno could slip out whenever he chose. No words passed between her and the man yet, just the dog bridging the distance one quiet step at a time. In the evenings, she sat on the porch with a cup of tea gone cold, listening to the city hum beyond the gates. The old loneliness was still there, but it felt less like a wall and more like a room with an open door. She thought of her father's study, the way he had closed it after her mother died, how the silence had grown until it filled every corner. Bruno had been the one to push his nose under that door years later, refusing to let her stay alone inside it. Now he was doing the same for someone else. One afternoon, the sky turned heavy again, not with rain, but with the threat of it. Sophia drove the familiar route herself this time. No meetings, no calls. She parked a block away from the narrow street Mrs. Ellis had mentioned in passing. The neighborhood was tight, houses pressed close together, paint peeling from porches, chain-link fences sagging under the weight of time. She walked with Bruno on leash, the dog pulling gently forward as though he knew the way. His ears flicked at every sound. Children shouting, a car backfiring, the distant bark of another dog. When they reached the small gray house with the cracked sidewalk, Bruno stopped, tail wagging once, then sat at the foot of the steps. Sophia hesitated. The front door was open a crack. Light spilled out, dim and yellow from a single bulb. She heard a boy's voice inside, soft and patient, reading aloud to himself. She stepped closer. Through the screen, she saw Ethan Rivera, 12 years old, slim and serious, dark hair falling over his forehead as he bent over a notebook at a small wooden table. A bare bulb hung above him, casting long shadows across the walls covered in crayon drawings. A doctor in white coat, a hospital bed, a woman in blue uniform smiling. The boy looked up, startled, but polite. "Hello," he said, voice high and clear. Bruno whined happily and pressed against the screen. Ethan laughed, a small, surprised sound, and opened the door wider. Bruno bounded inside first. Ethan dropped to his knees, arms around the thick neck, face buried in fur. The dog licked his cheek once, then lay down beside the table, head resting on the boy's foot. Sophia stood on the threshold, not entering, just watching. Ethan returned to his drawing, pencil moving steadily. He spoke to Bruno as he worked. Quiet stories about school, about wanting to fix people the way doctors fix broken bones, about making sure his dad never had to work so hard again. Sophia felt the words settle in her chest like stones in a riverbed. She thought of her own childhood drawings, hidden in drawers after her parents stopped asking to see them. She thought of the scholarships she had funded without ever meeting the recipients, checks signed in sterile offices. Here was a child drawing his future on scrap paper under a weak light, and a dog listening as though every word mattered. Outside, a stray dog barked from the alley. Bruno rose at once, hackles lifting, a low growl rumbling in his throat. He trotted to the door, positioned himself between Ethan and the sound, ears flat, body still. The barking stopped. Bruno returned, circled once, then settled again at the boy's side, tail thumping softly against the floorboards. Ethan reached down, scratched the dog's chest. "Good boy," he whispered. Sophia's throat tightened. The room smelled of old wood and faint cooking oil, of paper and pencil shavings. She saw safety in the way Bruno stayed close, a living promise that not everything had to be fought alone. She slipped away before Ethan noticed her fully. The walk back to the car was slow. Bruno padded beside her, calm now, his breathing even. Sophia felt the crack in her heart widen, not painfully, but with a strange relief. She had spent years building walls to keep the world out. Now she saw how thin they were, how easily a dog could walk through them, carrying warmth to places she had forgotten existed. In the quiet of the drive home, with Bruno's head resting on her lap, she made no grand vow, just a small one, spoken only to the darkening sky. She would do more than watch. She would begin to see. The night fell softly over the house, stars hidden behind a veil of clouds, the kind that hold secrets close, and whisper them only to those who lie awake. Inside, the wooden floors creaked faintly underfoot, a reminder of time's gentle passage. Sophia lay in the wide bed, sheets cool against her skin. The room was dark except for the faint glow from the hallway light she had left on, a habit from childhood when shadows felt too heavy. She stared at the ceiling, tracing cracks she had never noticed before. The visit to Michael's home replayed in her mind, not the peeling paint or the narrow streets, but the boy's small hands gripping the pencil, drawing dreams bigger than the dim bulb could light. Her own wealth felt hollow now, like a grand hall with no one to share the echo. She thought of the boardrooms where she commanded respect, the checks she signed without a face attached. What good was any of it if it left people like Michael walking miles in the dark, carrying grief alone? Bruno lay at the foot of the bed, his breathing deep and steady, a warm weight that grounded her. He shifted, large head lifting to rest on the mattress edge, eyes meeting hers in the low light. She reached out, fingers sinking into the thick black and tan fur. He sighed, content, as though saying it was enough just to be there. The touch stirred old memories, nights after her divorce, when the house felt like a stranger, and Bruno had pressed against her side until the tears dried. Now those memories intertwined with Ethan's voice, with Michael's quiet endurance. The ache grew, not sharp but deep, like roots pushing through soil long left fallow. The clock ticked softly in the hall. Sophia closed her eyes, but sleep would not come. Instead, fragments returned, words she had overheard under the oak. Michael speaking to Bruno as if the dog were the only one who could understand without judgment. The story of guests at her table, their noses wrinkling at the scent of honest work on his uniform. "Smells like sweat," they had said, voices light but cutting. And Michael, fearing to embarrass her, choosing the rain over the warmth inside. She saw it now. His bowed head, not from weakness, but from a kindness that protected even those who did not see him. The image merged with Ethan's drawings, the child dreaming of healing, of lifting his father from the shadows. Sophia's breath caught. The walls she had built, brick by careful brick, began to tremble. Tears came then, unbidden, hot trails down her cheeks. Not sobs, but a quiet release, the kind that washes away years of holding on too tight. Bruno stirred again, climbing onto the bed with a soft thump. He nosed her hand, then licked the salt from her fingers, his tongue rough and warm, eyes steady as old friends. The gesture broke something open inside her, not broken, but freed. She wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face in the fur that smelled of earth and loyalty. "You've taught me," she whispered, voice barely audible, "to care, to really see." In the silence that followed, Sophia felt the shift. No thunder, no grand revelation, just a quiet turning, like a key in a long-locked door. She thought of the envelope she would prepare, papers for a scholarship, a raise, a chance for Michael and his boy. It was not everything, but it was a start. A way to say, without words, that she had heard, that she understood. Bruno settled beside her, head on her pillow, breath mingling with hers. She stroked his ear, the rhythm slow and sure. The night deepened. For the first time in years, the loneliness felt shared, not solitary. A promise took root in that quiet room. Tomorrow she would act. Not for redemption alone, but for the simple grace of reaching out, for the beauty in seeing another's pain and choosing gently to ease it. Morning light filtered through the tall windows of the study, soft and golden, carrying the faint scent of fresh coffee from the kitchen below. The house felt different that day, quieter in a peaceful way, as though it had exhaled after holding its breath for too long. Sophia sat at her desk, the envelope already prepared, its edges crisp under her fingers. She had risen early, the night's tears dried, but their echo still warm inside her chest. When Michael knocked, she called him in. He entered slowly, still in his dark gray polo and khaki pants, hands clasped in front, eyes lowered, as always. The stubble on his jaw caught the light, silver threads among the black. She stood, walked around the desk, and handed him the envelope. "For Ethan," she said simply. "A full scholarship, through medical school if that's still his dream." Michael's breath caught. His fingers trembled as he opened it, reading the words once, then again. Tears welled, not falling yet, just shining. Then came the second page, the offer to manage the household staff, with a salary that would mean fewer night shifts, more evenings at home. He looked up at her, eyes wide with something between disbelief and gratitude. No words at first, just a quiet nod, then a step forward. He knelt beside Bruno, who had followed him in and now sat patiently at Sophia's feet. Michael wrapped his arms around the dog's thick neck, pressing his face into the fur. Bruno leaned into the embrace, tail sweeping slowly across the floorboards. Sophia watched, throat tight. In that moment, the room held no hierarchy, no employer, no employee, just two people and a dog who had carried them both across an invisible bridge. The weeks that followed brought small, steady changes. Sophia learned names she had once skimmed over on payroll sheets. She asked questions, gentle ones, about families, about dreams deferred. The staff room table filled at lunch. Laughter drifted up the stairs, unfamiliar but welcome. Bruno became the unofficial host, trotting from chair to chair, accepting scraps and pats with dignified grace. Sophia joined them sometimes, sitting at the end of the table with a cup of tea, listening more than speaking. The meals were simple, sandwiches, soup, stories, but they carried warmth that no mansion had ever held before. She felt the old loneliness recede, not gone entirely, but shared now, diluted by the quiet acts of attention. At night she walked the garden with Bruno, the leash loose, his steps matching hers. The oak tree stood silent witness, its branches no longer a place of solitude, but of memory turned kind. Years passed gently, as years do when life finds its rhythm again. Ethan graduated from medical school, top of his class, cap and gown crisp against the spring sun. Sophia sat in the audience, Bruno beside her on a special leash, graying now around the muzzle, but eyes still bright. The boy, now a young man, walked across the stage, diploma in hand. When his name was called, Bruno rose, tail wagging furiously, and pulled toward the platform. Sophia let the leash slip. The dog bounded up the steps, paws clicking on wood, and pressed against Ethan's legs. Ethan laughed, dropped to one knee, arms around the thick neck. The crowd murmured, then applauded, warm, surprised, touched. Sophia stood, clapping hardest, tears tracing silent paths down her cheeks. Later, at the edge of the gathering, Michael found her. He looked older, steadier, lines around his eyes softened by time and relief. "Thank you," he said, voice rough but clear. Sophia shook her head. "You and Bruno," she answered quietly. "You taught me what loyalty really means, what family can be." Bruno sat between them, head tilted as though understanding every word. In the quiet after the ceremony, as people drifted away and the sun dipped lower, Sophia rested her hand on Bruno's head. The dog leaned into her palm, breath slow and even. She looked at the young doctor hugging his father, at the people who had once been shadows in her life now standing in light. The loneliness that had once filled her rooms was gone, replaced by something fuller, connection, purpose, grace. She made no grand speech to the world. She simply walked home with her old friend beside her, knowing that sometimes the greatest changes begin with the smallest acts of seeing, of listening, of caring. And in that gentle truth, she found peace. As the years pass, remember this gentle truth. Loneliness, illness, and the quiet ache of age do not mean you are forgotten. Just like Sophia found light through one small act of seeing, someone out there sees you, your stories, your strength, your silent battles. You are never truly alone. Love and kindness still walk beside you, even on the hardest days. If this story touched your heart, share it with a friend who needs hope. Comment below what moved you most. Subscribe so these reminders of grace keep coming. May the Lord wrap you in His comfort, heal your body, ease your loneliness, and fill your remaining days with peace. God bless you always.